The courtroom was quiet, the tension from the DNA results still lingering in the air. Tonia Pinkston sat in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together as she tried to steady her breathing. The truth had been revealed, but the emotional weight of it all was far from over. Kenny Feagin, sitting across the room, looked like a man who had lost everything. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes were filled with a deep, unshakable sadness. Judge Lake broke the silence, her voice calm but firm. "Ms. Pinkston, Mr. Feagin, I know this has been an incredibly difficult journey for both of you. The truth has come to light, but now it's up to you to decide how you move forward. This doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something new, if you're both willing to try." Tonia looked up, her eyes still glistening with tears. "Your Honor, I just want to thank you for helping us get to the truth. It's been a long and painful journey, but now I can finally put this behind me. Gus was my father, and nothing will ever change that. But I also know that Mr. Feagin has been carrying this burden for years. I don't want him to suffer anymore." Kenny Feagin looked at Tonia, his expression a mix of regret and gratitude. "Tonia, I don't know what to say. I've spent so many years believing you were my daughter. I missed out on so much of your life because of this secret. And now to find out that it was all for nothing. It's hard to accept." Tonia nodded, her voice soft but steady. "I understand, Mr. Feagin. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you. But I hope you can find some peace now that the truth is out. You don't have to carry this burden anymore." Judge Lake leaned forward, her gaze shifting between Tonia and Kenny. "Mr. Feagin, Ms. Pinkston, this doesn't have to be the end of your relationship. While the DNA results have clarified the biological truth, they don't have to define your future. You both have a chance to move forward, to heal, and to find closure. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Kenny hesitated, then spoke, his voice trembling. "Tonia, I know I'm not your father. But if you're willing, I'd like to be a part of your life in some way. Even if it's just as a friend. I don't want to lose you completely." Tonia looked at Kenny, her expression softening. "Mr. Feagin, I don't know what the future holds. But I'm willing to try. You've been through a lot and so have I. Maybe we can find a way to move forward together." Judge Lake smiled, a rare moment of warmth breaking through her usually stern demeanor. "That's all I can ask for. Healing takes time, but it starts with a willingness to try. I hope you both can find peace and closure as you move forward." The courtroom fell silent as the weight of Judge Lake's words settled over everyone. Tonia and Kenny sat just a few feet apart, their emotions raw and their futures uncertain. But for the first time in a long time there was a glimmer of hope, a chance for healing and a new beginning. As the courtroom drama came to a close, the story of Tonia Pinkston and Kenny Feagin reached a poignant conclusion. The truth had been revealed, and while it brought pain, it also opened the door to healing and reconciliation. Their journey was far from over, but they had taken the first steps toward a brighter future. The courtroom was still reeling from the revelation of the DNA results. Tonia Pinkston sat in her seat, her hands trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. Kenny Feagin, on the other hand, looked utterly defeated. His shoulders slumped and his face was pale, as if the life had been drained out of him. The truth had been revealed, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. Judge Lake leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Ms. Pinkston, Mr. Feagin, I know this is a difficult moment for both of you. The truth has come to light, but it doesn't have to define your future. You both have a chance to move forward, to heal, and to find closure." Tonia nodded, her eyes still glistening with tears. "Your Honor, I just want to thank you for helping us get to the truth. It's been a long and painful journey, but now I can finally put this behind me. Gus was my father, and nothing will ever change that." Kenny Feagin, however, was struggling to come to terms with the results. He looked up at Judge Lake, his voice shaky. "Your Honor, I don't understand. I always believed she was my daughter. I felt it in my heart. How could I be so wrong?" Judge Lake's expression softened. Mr. Feagin, sometimes our hearts lead us to believe things that aren't true. But the DNA results are clear. You are not Ms. Pinkston's biological father. That doesn't mean you can't still have a relationship with her, if that's what you both want. Kenny shook his head, his voice filled with regret. I don't know if that's possible. I've spent so many years believing she was mine. Now, I don't even know who I am anymore. Tonia looked at Kenny, her expression a mix of pity and sadness. Mr. Feagin, I'm sorry for everything you've been through. But I hope you can understand that Gus was my father. He raised me, he loved me, and he was there for me every step of the way. That's something I'll never forget. Kenny nodded, his eyes filled with tears. I understand. I wish things could have been different. Judge Lake interjected, her tone gentle but firm. Mr. Feagin, Ms. Pinkston, this doesn't have to be the end of your story. You both have a chance to move forward, to heal, and to find peace. It won't be easy, but it's possible. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of Judge Lake's words settled over everyone. Tonia and Kenny sat just a few feet apart, yet they felt worlds away from each other. The truth had been revealed, but the emotional fallout was far from over. The courtroom was eerily silent as Judge Lake returned to the bench, holding a sealed envelope in her hand. The DNA results were inside, and everyone's eyes were fixed on it. Tonia Pinkston sat rigidly, her heart pounding in her chest. Kenny Feagin leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together, his face a mixture of hope and fear. The moment of truth had arrived. Before we open these results, Judge Lake began, her voice calm but commanding, I want to remind everyone that this is about more than just biology. This is about identity, family, and the bonds that tie us together. Whatever the results say, they will not erase the love and memories shared between Ms. Pinkston and the man she calls her father, Gus Pinkston. Tonia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She thought of Gus, the man who had taught her how to ride a bike, who had been there for every school play, who had held her hand when she was scared. No piece of paper could ever change what he meant to her. Kenny Feagin, on the other hand, looked desperate. For years, he had carried the weight of this secret, believing Tonia was his daughter. He had missed out on her childhood, her milestones, and her life. Now, he was clinging to the hope that the DNA results would finally give him the chance to be a part of her world. Judge Lake opened the envelope slowly, the sound of the paper tearing echoing through the room. She glanced at the results, her expression unreadable. The tension was unbearable. In the case of 43-year-old Tonia Pinkston, Judge Lake began, her voice steady, it has been determined by this court that Mr. Kenny Feagin is not her father. The room erupted in gasps. Tonia let out a sob of relief, her hands covering her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. Kenny Feagin, however, looked as though he had been struck. His face crumpled, and he shook his head in disbelief. No, that can't be right, he stammered, his voice breaking. I always believed she was mine. I felt it in my heart. Judge Lake's gaze softened as she looked at him. Mr. Feagin, I know this is not the news you wanted to hear, but the DNA results are clear. You are not Ms. Pinkston's biological father. Kenny slumped in his seat, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hold back tears. A lifetime of torture for nothing, he whispered. Tonia, still crying, looked at him with a mix of pity and relief. I'm sorry, she said softly. But Gus was my father. He always will be. Judge Lake nodded. Ms. Pinkston, I know this has been a long and painful journey for you. For almost 30 years, you've carried this burden. I hope you can find peace now that the truth has been revealed. Tonia nodded, wiping her tears. Thank you, Your Honor. I just wish my dad were here to see this. He deserved to know the truth. Kenny Feagin, still in shock, looked up at Judge Lake. Where do we go from here? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Judge Lake sighed. Together, she said gently. You both have a chance to move forward, to heal. This doesn't have to be the end of your story. The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. Tonia and Kenny sat just a few feet apart, yet they felt worlds away from each other. The truth had been revealed, but the emotional fallout was far from over. The courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone waited for the DNA results. Tonia Pinkston sat stiffly in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her mind raced back to the day her mother had dropped the bombshell about Kenny Feagin. She could still hear her mother's voice, shaky and uncertain as she said, "This is your father." Tonia had been 16 years old, and the words had shattered her world. Kenny Feagin sat across the room, his face a mix of hope and anxiety. For decades, he had carried the weight of this secret, believing Tonia was his daughter. He had watched her grow up from a distance, never able to claim her as his own. Now he was finally facing the truth head-on, but the stakes were higher than he had imagined. Judge Lake returned to the bench, her expression unreadable. "Before we proceed," she said, "I'd like to hear from an independent witness. Ms. Melissa Pinkston, Tonia's sister, has joined us remotely. Miss Pinkston, can you hear me?" "Yes, Your Honor." Melissa's voice crackled through the speakers. She sounded hesitant, almost reluctant to speak. "You are Tonia's sister, correct?" Judge Lake asked. "Yes, ma'am," Melissa replied. "Tell me what you know about this paternity secret," Judge Lake pressed. Melissa sighed deeply. "Your Honor, honestly, I don't even want to talk about it. It's been this long. It should have stayed a secret. My mom was a good woman. My dad was awesome. If it was a secret, it should have stayed a secret. Now there's family that didn't know that now. It just hurts." Judge Lake leaned forward. "Did you ever overhear anything about this?" Melissa hesitated, then spoke softly. "Yeah, as a young kid I heard things. Grown-ups think kids don't listen, but we do. I heard my mom and her friends talking. They said Kenny was Tonia's father. But I acted like I didn't hear it. My mom didn't want any of us to know. It was supposed to stay hidden." The room fell silent as Melissa's words sank in. Tonia's eyes filled with tears. She had always suspected her sister knew more than she let on, but hearing it confirmed was another blow. Judge Lake turned to Kenny. "Mr. Feagin, you've carried this secret for decades. What was it like for you, believing you had a biological child but never being able to acknowledge her?" Kenny's voice trembled as he spoke. "It hurt, Your Honor. Hurt every day. I missed out on so much. Her first steps, her first words, her graduation. I wanted to be there for her, but I couldn't. I respected her mother's wishes, but it tore me up inside." Tonia shook her head, her voice breaking. "But you didn't respect me. You didn't respect my dad. You let him raise me, thinking I was his, and you never said a word. How could you do that?" Kenny looked down, his face filled with regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it was best for everyone." Judge Lake interjected, her tone firm. "Ms. Pinkston, your mother told Mr. Feagin he is your biological father. What is your doubt?" Tonia's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I had only one father, Gus Pinkston. He's my dad. Mr. Feagin and I never had a father-daughter relationship. He was just someone who came in and out of my life. I don't believe he's my father." The tension in the room was palpable. Judge Lake called for another brief recess, leaving everyone on edge. The DNA results were moments away, and the truth was about to be revealed. Would Tonia's world be turned upside down, or would her belief in Gus as her father be confirmed? As the courtroom drama unfolded, the stakes grew higher. The truth was about to be revealed, and no one was prepared for the shocking admission that would change everything. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Tonia Pinkston stood before Judge Lake, her hands trembling as she tried to hold back tears. For 43 years, she had believed Gus Pinkston was her father. But now, a man she barely knew, Kenny Feagin, was claiming to be her biological father. The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. "Mr. Feagin, you're here to prove that Miss Pinkston is your biological daughter," Judge Lake said, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, Your Honor," Feagin replied. his voice steady but his eyes filled with emotion. I kept this secret for 40 years, but now the DNA will prove it. Tonia shook her head, her voice breaking as she spoke. Your Honor, I've only known Mr. Feagin since I was 16. My father, the man who raised me, is Gus Pinkston. He's my dad. He always has been. Judge Lake leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Ms. Pinkston, what upset you most about Mr. Feagin's claim? Tonia took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I met Mr. Feagin when I was 16. I never knew him before that. My mom took me to a friend's house one day and said, I want you to meet someone. Then she dropped the bomb. This is your father. I was shocked. My dad, Gus Pinkston, was my father. He was the one who raised me, who loved me. And now this man was saying he was my real dad. It was the worst day of my life. The room fell silent as Tonia's words echoed. Judge Lake turned to Feagin. Mr. Feagin, start from the beginning. Why do you believe Ms. Pinkston is your biological daughter? Feagin hesitated, then spoke. Me and Tonia's mother had an affair. We worked together at a plant. It lasted about 5 or 6 months. She came to me before I left the job and told me she was pregnant. She said I was the father. Judge Lake raised an eyebrow. Did you know she was married? Feagin nodded, his voice heavy with regret. Yes, Your Honor. I knew it was wrong, but she didn't want the secret to get out. I agreed to keep it quiet. I knew Gus would raise Tonia as his own. Tonia's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Your Honor, I grew up believing Gus was my father. No one ever told me anything different. The only reason this came out was because my mom thought I was dating one of Mr. Feagin's family members. She thought I needed to know. But it wasn't me, it was my sister. That's why they told me. It was the worst day of my life. Judge Lake leaned back, her expression thoughtful. So, at 16 you were asked to keep this secret. Tonia nodded, her voice breaking. Yes, Your Honor. I never told my dad. He passed away when I was 27, never knowing the truth. I lived with this guilt for years. Feagin's voice softened. I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted to be a part of her life. I always believed she was my daughter. Judge Lake turned to Tonia. Ms. Pinkston, your mother told Mr. Feagin he is your biological father. What is your doubt? Tonia's voice was firm. I had only one father, Gus Pinkston. He's my dad. Mr. Feagin and I never had a father-daughter relationship. He was just someone who came in and out of my life. The tension in the room was palpable. Judge Lake called for a brief recess, leaving everyone on edge. What would the DNA results reveal? Would Tonia's world be turned upside down? Or would her belief in Gus as her father be confirmed? As the courtroom drama unfolded, the stakes grew higher. The truth was about to be revealed, and no one was prepared for the shocking admission that would change everything.